Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining the public section of the February's Delivery Board meeting. This is where, as Police and Crime Commissioner, I get to hold the force to account, the Chief Constable more precisely actually, on the delivery of the Police and Crime Plan and what is being done by the force to cut crime in Bedfordshire, to protect victims and to prevent harm from prevent crime in the first place. So we've already been through an initial meeting, which is the closed section, which meant we were discussing some sensitive matters which we cannot put in the public domain for various reasons, but there will be some of them that will be featuring in this public section, because I feel it's important for you to also get a flavor of some of the things that we've discussed, as well as what the force are doing as well. In terms of update from me, one of the big decisions that I've made recently is around the funding of about over £200,000 for the Safer Roads Fund. This has gone out already to several of the town and parish councils, as well as the ward councils across the county, which is designed to help educate road users, build infrastructure in some cases, as well as help to keep our roads safer across the county. The commissioning program is going on in earnest. Some of the partners will have already been informed about their position in terms of funding for 2020-23, and I'm pleased to inform you that quite a number of them will be getting a multi-year funding settlement over about 2 or 3 year period, so they can actually plan longer term. But I anticipate that everyone, all the commission partners, will have information about the funding that they'll be receiving or otherwise by the end of March. So that'll be in time for the new financial year. And that's all I will want to say at the moment in terms of the update from me. At this point, I'll now be asking Deputy Chief Constable Trevor Rodenhurst for verbal updates on force activity against the Police and Crime Plan. Trevor?
Yeah, so Commissioner, on this section, really, it was just a real short note to say, if you recall, at the previous meeting, we discussed the work we were doing to map all of our activity against your Police and Crime Plan with a view to, in the new performance year, agendering the whole year ahead so that we can focus on different elements of the plan and the corresponding activity. Today's just a brief update, so I'm pleased to say that's all on track. So what I would request is at the next meeting we agenda an item where I can outline a proposed timetable and obviously take any views and feedback that that you have on if that meets with approval, really, for a plan to take us through the next year and do this meeting slightly differently with it themed against your plan.
Right, that'd be because I was going to ask about when we can expect to start having that in place. So the next meeting, so we can have the sometime in the agenda for next meeting to discuss that. That'll be helpful.
Yeah. Next meeting, I'll outline the timetable from April onwards effectively, and then we'll start giving themed updates from April. Okay.
Good. Yeah. Around the community policing plans, that's item number 10 on the agenda. Phil?
Sorry, just trying to get off mute. Yeah, this is the paper you receive at every board commissioner due to yours and the Chief's commitment around community policing. As you can see from the report, there are various parts of community policing model, including our hubs, our hate crime, our rural crime and our community cohesion. The main bit we focus on is the hubs because they are the visible police officers out there in certain hubs within the force area. And as reported last time, we've got a budget for 67 of those PCs across those hubs, and we currently sit at 65, which is the same as we reported last time round. And we've made a commitment in force to try and maintain a vacancy level of no lower than 95% in those hubs, which obviously 65 is doing that. So good progress. PCSOs are slightly down on where they should be, but there is a recruitment intake coming in at the moment, so that will put us back up to where we need to be. So overall, Chair, we're in a good place around the actual model and the community hub model. And then The focus in terms of their activity this time around is around Bedford Borough, and some of this you already know, but I just highlight a couple of bits in there. So the team continue with Operation Primrose, which is focused on the Tavistock Street area in Bedford, where we have seen some real good interventions by the community team, both looking at short-term but also longer-term problem solving, and we are seeing some good reductions in terms of ASB and crime in those areas. In that area, around about 64% reduction in ASB and around about a 52% reduction in crime in that area. Still, that continues because there are certain parts of the year where the demand increases, but a good focus on that area of Bedford. And then just another area in the Bedford Borough area is around cuckooing, and the benefit of our officers having a good local knowledge and understanding, where they were able to identify a property that was being cuckooed, and they worked with the rest of the force around that, and we managed to disrupt what was pretty much a dangerous county line, and also allowed us to safeguard 2 vulnerable people from that address that were being cuckooed. So some good work in the Bedford Borough area, and overall, as I say, Chair, we're in a good position around the people doing community policing for Bedfordshire Police.
And thanks for that, Phil. Do you have any sort of breakdown of the numbers for each of the 3 areas, please?
Yeah, so in terms of Luton, in terms of officers, we're 22 against 24. In terms of Central, we are 24 against 25. Sorry, 34 against 35. And in Bedford, we are 19 against 18.
So we are over by 1 in Bedford.
Over 1 in Bedford, and I've given you the wrong figure on Central beds. I shouldn't be a CFO, should I? Because I've miscalculated. It's 24 against 25, not 34 against 35.
I was gonna come back on that. I said, well, that's a big jump from the last figure that I saw. You know, I wouldn't complain. I'm sure the people in Central beds won't be complaining either. Well, it's now okay. Right now to it. I mean, in terms of the deployment and how these officers are being used, what are deployed rather? What are they generally being tasked to do generally outside of the operation that we've got going on, like Highgate and Foresight and Primrose? What is the general tasking that community police officers have been given at the moment?
Yeah, I'll perhaps come in there rather than Phil answer that, or Sian will come in and support. So, Commissioner, I think you know this, and it's certainly remarked upon in our most recent HMIC feedback that we had from them during the inspection, and we await the report still, obviously. But what we have done is we've ring-fenced our community officers to make sure they are there specifically to deal with issues of local concern, and they're not being abstracted to deal with force response or other commitments. Whilst on occasion we do have to do that, then it is, you know, and that's recognised because we're an emergency service and we have to do that primarily. But actually, the HMIC found, and what we found when we speak with our officers, is that they feel very able to be committed to dealing with the issues that are relevant to their local communities, and those are generated in a number of ways. So they are generated through the community setting meetings and the community setting priority meetings that we have with local residents that are advertised by the teams, and residents can attend either in person or online and give a view as to around what the things are that matter to them in their local communities. And the other way that we generate the priorities is through the force tasking and coordination process, and through problem solving activity that's directed through the force tasking process as well. And Sian, as the chair of that, might want to add a little bit more, but those are the general routes for how we determine what the activity is that our local officers are engaged in their local communities. But the idea is it's very much focused on local concerns and things that matter, or we want a problem solving long-term approach to. Sian, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit more, Chief. Commissioner, you'll be well cited on the fact that we follow the principles and the pillars of neighbourhood policing within the force. And if you just take 3 of those and talk about those briefly, because they just epitomise what our community cops do day in, day out. So it's solving local problems, as the Chief alluded to. It's what matters to the local communities. and not just addressing the here and now, but looking at long-term sustainable solutions. It's targeting activity, and that's what comes out of the FTTCG in terms of hot places or hot people in those areas. And then the final one that I'll just focus on is engaging communities and having that multi-agency approach to community safety and crime reduction. And you'll be well cited on the fact that they work hand in glove with the Veru, and just this week the Central Beds and Bedford Borough have taken up the TREE initiative, the TREE programme, which is tackling, reducing and ending exploitation, where our neighbourhood cops are working with children's services, health, education, and going out meeting with young people just to highlight the perils of vulnerability and exploitation.
That's really good. And if I just track back a bit to the performance dashboard, and this is not going to be me throwing on the, any surprises here. Now, you mentioned about the community teams. Obviously, they've been deployed to stay in the local areas as much as possible now. We're not having the abstractions that might have been the case several years ago. And in the intel part of the performance data that you mentioned, I mean, I see that quite a lot of the intel submissions are coming in from officers, and these numbers actually have been going up in the last quarter, from November, December, January, actually been going up. Do you think this might have something to do with the fact that we've got officers being more present on the ground, and they're seeing more, and they're collecting more intel?
Most definitely. We really promote the fact that our local cops need to know their community. And when we talk about knowing their community, it's knowing those key engagement opportunities, but also asking them to stretch themselves in terms of understanding what the serious and organised picture looks like on their area. We fully know that one PCSO won't be able to address all those issues, but our PCSOs take great pride in knowing about their communities and all those potential threats. So if they see somebody who's got a new car, somebody who's hanging around with someone different, they can submit that intelligence, and they do so.
Okay. And just lastly on the community policing bit around problem solving, is there an element of the tasking that community officers are given that is geared around a longer term problem solving of sticky issues in communities? Because, for example, if you've got a long term an issue of antisocial behavior around a play area, for example, I mean, assuming we don't want to arrest the kids who are playing there, who might be drinking as well, is there a focus around trying to find a longer term solution to that and working with partners with the community officers?
Yeah, so the FTTCG is not just specifically police attended. So we have
FTTCG,
the Force Tasking and Coordination Group, so Tactical and Tasking Coordination Group. So we have members from our CSPs there. So we have our local CSP managers at that meeting. So if there's a local problem that community policing don't think they can solve on their own, they can come into the FTTCG. I've got the capacity and the capability there to provide funding and additional force assets, but then also the local communities and the local council will provide their resources as well. So that's when we give those examples, and as Phil alluded to, Operation Primrose is a great example, which was not police alone, far from it. It involved all our partners and other agencies to come together to have a longer term solution. And there's simple things, like one of the issues on Tavistock Street was to put up a wall and a gate, and that's been done just to block off some of the alleyways.
Right. And are there any areas though currently that concern you in terms of the level of demand that our community officers are facing, that you think probably need some attention? Are there any areas of concern at all?
Not that stand out, and the reason being because we are very flexible on a daily basis. So we have additional force assets at our disposal. And if on any one day there's a peak in demand, I'm able to mobilise resources from other areas to go and support our community officers. And we do that every single day.
Brilliant. Excellent, thanks. Oh, just sorry, one last question. You said, Phil, you mentioned about 95% fill rate for most of the roles. Are there any plans to fill the remaining, is it 4 vacancies at all, or are we going to just leave those vacant in community?
So we're about 2 under at the moment, and we'll continue to try and fill those. There's just a recognition, Festus, of all the other demands on the organisation and people looking for other options within their career, that sometimes they'll be moving in and out of community. So just recognising we'll try and keep it at 95%.
Yeah, that's understood. It's just that I wanted to make sure that we're not just accepting that's the way it's always going to be. But if there is a capacity to do that, then we would want to fill that. Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that. Then we've got the next agenda item, which is number 11 on effectiveness. Again, Phil, around the recruitment and retention piece. Can I just start off by thanking Julia Henderson and her team for the really good work they've done in putting this paper together. It's quite compelling in terms of some of the real challenges that we face. And the reason why I asked for this was because, as one of the pledges that I made during the campaign, and also one part of the policy plan, is that while we want to recruit more police officers, which thankfully we are doing now compared to what was happening about a decade ago, we also need to focus on retention. And there is a cost to taxpayers and residents, and also in terms of reputation to the force, if we don't get this issue of retention right. So whilst we want to improve recruitment, we also want to do a lot better in retention. So that's why I asked for this paper, which has been very well put together. So over to you, Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I guess what I'll do is just put a bit of context, some figures around some of that context, our understanding of those figures, some of the interventions we've already got in place, and some of the further interventions we're looking at, Chair, if that's helpful. So in terms of context, I think it's just worth understanding the context of Bedfordshire Police in terms of its national funding position. So I think Bedfordshire Police has made a very strong case in the last 3 or 4 years that it is underfunded in terms of the level of funding it receives from the government. And we've equated that to around about 380 officers, which has been pretty well received by policing ministers and the Home Office in terms of understanding where we start. I guess what that means is that if we perceive ourselves as being 380 officers less than we need, then those that are in force are doing a lot more work than they should be in terms of if we're properly funded. So just recognising that context. I guess then in terms of your piece about attrition, in 21-22, we've had 98 organisational leavers. So 98 leavers, that's police officer leavers. So that's approximately lose 10 officers per month. And 59% of those are resigning. So the rest are resignations and those that are transferring to other forces. Of those 98, 38 are student officers. So that's people within their first 2 years of service that are leaving the organisation. So around about 39%. So that's just some of the I guess, the context in which we're operating in. But I think it's also worth understanding that prior to most recently 2018-19, the number of people that we were recruiting were literally just to replace those that were resigning or leaving. Since then, with preset flexibility, with the Uplift programme, which is the national programme to increase officers nationally by 20,000, we are seeing a huge amount of officers coming into Bedfordshire Police, more than it was previously. Now, still not enough, but bigger number than we've had previously. So that context of the number we are bringing into the organisation is a lot different to where it was 3 or 4 years ago. And I guess what we've also seen in that time is a huge drive to change the diversity within our organisation. And in the early years, 2017, 2018, 2019, we saw some really good numbers of people entering the organisation that most probably wouldn't have chose policing as their favoured career. I guess what we learned from that is, whilst we saw some excellent results of bringing people into the organisation, I don't think was ready for that type of difference within the organisation, which was the reason that we then brought in what's called now our workforce development team, which is headed up by a chief superintendent. So a fairly large investment into making sure that as we recruit people into the organisation, we follow their journey and we're able to, as you said earlier, be able to retain them rather than see them leave in their first 2 years of service. In terms of numbers then, since January 2020, we recruited 360 new recruits, and we've seen 66 of those new recruits leave, and 58 of those have been resignations. And through exit interviews that we do with all of the officers to understand either pre them leaving or when they're leaving, to understand why they're leaving the organisation, the majority have stated that stress is a big factor for them in terms of changing their career thoughts or aspirations around Bedfordshire Police and moving out of policing into some other form of career. And I guess that mostly links back to the context that I talked about earlier in terms of we are asking our officers to come into an organisation whereby the demand is most probably greater than a lot of other police forces. And therefore what we're seeing is those student officers have been struggled to manage their NVQ, which is a qualification they need to become a police officer, and the demand we're placing on them to be a police officer. I think we're starting to get that balance right with the new team in. We've brought in what we call student development officers, who are now working alongside those students to make sure that their journey and their journey in their first 2 years is as smooth as it can be, providing that extra support to make sure they're getting their qualification, but at the same time making sure they get that right level of policing experience in those first 2 years, but with a major focus on the NVQ, because that is what they need to obtain in their first 2 years around qualification. At the moment, there's 4 student support officers, and we're looking to increase that in 22-23 to make sure that as we see an increase in student officers, we've got enough people to provide that dedicated support. And we're looking at that as part of the position to be in from the 1st of April 2022. I guess other bits that we've done just to try and address some of those concerns, we've created 2 extra resources that focus on positive action. So again, that is making sure that when we're looking at diversity in the organisation, we've got people that are providing a dedicated focus to that. We've increased our wellbeing capacity with 2 wellbeing advisors who work with our officers, whether they be new recruits or whether they be well embedded into the organisation, to make sure that we are putting a real strong emphasis on the wellbeing side of our officers, bearing in mind that we know that the majority of our student officers are leaving because of stress. So that's an enhancement, and we're looking to take that a little bit further in terms of the occupational health service that we provide across Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire, and the new employment assistance programme, which again provides a further level of support to those officers. So we've already made some big changes in the organisation to address some of those concerns we saw early on in 2018, 2019 and 2019-20. But as I said earlier, we're still seeing a high level of resignations from those student officers. So some of the things that we're looking to do to enhance that is, as I said, we're already looking at enhancing our student development officers. We're already working with the Open University to see if we can look at a framework in terms of enhancing that student officer journey, bearing in mind that as we move into the new qualification framework, they will be looking at getting degrees as part of their policing journey, and working with the Open University will help us understand what that journey looks like for them, and with a real focus on retention. We're focusing with the College of Policing and looking at some of the best practice that they are seeing around attrition and retention. And we've recently engaged with the national, what's called the Uplift team, who are looking at working with us to making sure that everything we are doing is as positive it can be in terms of that, both retention, but also that recruitment process. Also looking at how we invest into our supervision, because we place a lot of reliance on our tutor constables and our sergeants in terms of the number of student officers we have within the organisation. So as you're aware, as part of the budget for 22-23, we've increased our number of inspectors by 8. A couple of those will go directly into the student development team, and a couple of and the rest will enhance our supervisory capability across the organisation, so we can support those sergeants and tutor constables in the work they're doing, trying to help the student journey. And I guess the other bit that we're doing, which I'm not sure is happening anywhere else that I've seen, is a real focus from the force exec, which is Chief Constable and his management team, with first line supervisors. So that is with sergeants and inspectors, where the team is sitting down with those as individuals, understanding some of the issues they have, but also recognising that we understand the context they're operating in, understanding what we can do to help them in terms of their journey in working with the student officers, and really providing extra support down at the first and second line supervisor level, rather than just leaving that to their managers. So that's some of the work that we are doing, some of the work we're about to do, Festus. And at the moment, as I say, whilst we're seeing a slight improvement on attrition, there's still some work for us to do. But I don't know if Gary wants to come in on that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I mean, I won't add a great deal to it. That this is something that we anticipated would be an issue when we started to grow the organisation, and hence the purpose of making the investment in the workforce development roles that we've got some years ago now. It is, for lots of reasons, the right thing to do to focus on retention, both for the personal development of the individuals, but also the organisational aspect of that and the value of it as well. As you've already alluded to, it costs a significant amount of money to recruit and train a police officer. We want to get the best return on that we can. And as you've seen, those 66 leavers are 66 that we'll then have to replace as we go through the recruitment cycle. The bit that we never know is we never know what we've prevented as a result of the interventions that we've made. So it might be the number would be higher were it not for the work we've already done. And whilst I know that you'll share my passion around getting this right and making sure that, for all the reasons we've stated, we deliver on reducing the number of leavers that we've got and improve the retention rate. But the reality of this is a difficult one, because this is going to go on for a number of years. And we know we're an outlier nationally in terms of retention. Some of that is because of the sheer numbers of people that we're recruiting. So when you look, we know that most people are going to leave policing in their first 2 to 3 years of service across the UK, not just here in Bedfordshire. And when you then look at the number of our officers that are currently in training, that means we are going to see, because we have the highest proportion anywhere in the UK of officers with less than 5 years service. So we know that that will feed through into a higher level of officer leavers. So that is a challenge for us as we go forward. It will continue to be an issue for us, or no matter what work we do and how much resource we allocate to it, this will be an issue for us realistically for the next 3 to 5 years at least, because that's how long we're going to be in that uplift cycle. And when we transition onto PEQF, then we're going to have officers on a 3-year training program rather than a 2-year training program. And then when you build in all of the necessary replacement around the attrition and recruitment piece, then we'll be in that space, I think, for the next 3 to 5 years. But we're not at all complacent around it. We're engaging with everybody we can. We've been on it already for 2 years, but it just goes to show the scale and the real challenge that's involved in this piece. And it's compounded, as Phil has spoken about, in the organisational context by the fact that, and we touched on it in the offender management piece earlier on, people in Bedfordshire are used to carrying heavy workloads. And we rely hugely on our officers and staff to do more than many of their colleagues would do in other forces, because of the volume of the workloads that we have, and not everybody is able to adjust with that. And that's compounded a little bit by the fact that our tutors are pretty fatigued. Our sergeants are really busy, as are our inspectors. And hence that's why we're investing the time in them to make clear the things that are really important to us around caring for our staff and all the wellbeing offer and support we've got around all the things that we do in there. But this is a really tricky problem for policing and for us specifically in Bedfordshire that will endure, I'm afraid. But we are committed to doing everything we can to make it the best environment to work in. And there is another piece in this as well, and we won't talk about individual numbers around capabilities that we have. But people come into policing with a certain expectation, of what they think they're going to be doing, and that tends to be the frontline response activity. We're not in a position where we can accommodate everybody where they'd want to go originally in their posting, and actually some of the really critical need that we have in the organisation is in other places than response. And if you put that into the context of our geographic location of the southeast, we are a highly mobile, and if you look at the retention pressures around most forces, most of the southeast forces feature in the highest areas where they struggle with retention, because it's a mobile marketplace, and actually there is a significant draw because of the extra pensionable allowances and salary that can be drawn from the Met. And if you combine those things with the fact that somebody can go and do exactly the job that they wanted to do without having to go and do something that doesn't really think that they wanted to do, and then they can do it in a neighbouring force or a force which has a higher southeast allowance or a higher allowance in terms of the Met central allowances, then those are other challenges for us as well. So I think it's, I don't want to paint too bleak a picture, but I don't want to underplay the scale of the challenge either. We're invested in it, we're alive to it, we've got lots of activity around it, and we'll keep working really hard on it, but it is a difficult place for us. And the final bit is around investing in supervision, because those supervisors who are quite fatigued and don't have, when I joined and when Trevor and Sian joined, we'd be on one team for 2 years, and we'd have a level of pastoral care from our sergeants where they knew really well who we were, they knew what we were doing, they knew what our development needs were. Now, if you've got 6 people coming through every month on your team as a sergeant, that's quite difficult to track. And actually, if they're only with you for 8 weeks before they go on to another team, then some of the sergeants don't necessarily have that at top of their priority list for making sure that they're doing what they need to with those individuals. And that's why we're trying to give the supervisors support, and the additional posts that we've got for inspectors will assist with that as well, to create some capacity that enables us to focus on that as a key priority for us. So I won't add anything further because I'm sure there'll be some useful questions.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that, Gary and Phil. Thanks for your interventions there. I appreciate that. And, and also I'm glad that you acknowledge, that this is not something that can be downplayed, because it can't be downplayed. It is when it's compared to other forces, it's a very, very concerning picture. And I very much understand, the rationale and the reason that you give for that. What I want to ask is, what is the force doing? What plans are there to make sure that people are joining with as clear a picture of what policing is like? So when I look at the report here, some of the keywords phrasing for reasons for leaving, the majority are leaving, as quite rightly mentioned, Phil, because of mental health or stress related concerns, not necessarily mental health concerns before they joined, because there will have been the vetting that goes into it. It was most likely stuff that arose after the joint policing. You also have those who are resigning because it was not for them. Others leaving because of work-life balance, resigning prior to a process being taken place or misconduct. So very few, 2 were dismissed. So a small number. But what are the plans in place to deal with this expectation gap, or deficit, as I would call it? Trevor, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Commissioner, just to assist with that, I've recently attended our sort of recruitment evenings and events. And what I would say is we're very honest with people. It's an absolutely fantastic career, policing, and there's no other job like it. You do get a chance to change people's lives almost on a daily basis. However, graphic we are in terms of some of the situations you might have to find yourself in as a young officer, until you actually go to the scene where there may be, sadly, someone who's deceased or another disturbing sort of scene of that nature, you're never actually going to know how you can sort of manage and handle that and how that makes you feel until you've actually been to a situation like that. So as much as we do all we can to prepare people for that, the reality of and doing that combined with shift patterns, etc., it's not a job for everybody. But it is an amazing career, so we just have to kind of have that balance, and so but we are very much, we're very kind of graphic and real at those situations to explain what it means and what it will entail. And we obviously allow, you know, people aspiring to join the police to come along and ride-alongs, etc., which is a little bit hindered by COVID, but we're, you know, obviously coming through that now. So, you know, there's all those opportunities to try and get a better insight, along with joining the Special Constabulary, etc., to get exposure to policing. So very much we are, you know, we do try and manage that. I'll let the Chief come in.
And just quickly before you come in, Gary, have the force resumed ride-alongs now?
Not yet, I don't think, but I think we will be in the very near future. Okay.
Because I would strongly recommend those who want to join the force to come and do a Friday night or Saturday night shift, well, pretty much any shift potentially. You never know what would happen. Gary.
Yeah, I would say come along on ride-alongs. I'd just say as well, bear with us because we've got a bit of a backlog of people that want to come and do them, so it might take a little while to work through. No, I mean, just to follow on what Trevor was saying, really, I'm quite fortunate in that I get to see prospective joiners at some of our recruitment evenings, and as Trevor says, we are very realistic in terms of, you know, the challenges that they'll face. I see them also then either at their attestation or on week one when they've just got their uniform and they're going through their initial training. And then I see all of them on a individual basis when they conclude their MVQ process and then what will ultimately be their PQF process at the end of their 2 years. And despite the fact that we try and prepare them through the initial conversations at the recruitment evenings and the realness of the things they're going to be dealing with, we prepare them through training. You know, when I talk to them at the end of their graduation and I get them to cast their mind back to the initial conversation that we'd have had in week one or through the recruitment evenings, I say to them, if I'd have told you at the outset that you'd have done the things that you've done in the last 2 years, would you have believed me? And I've yet to hear anybody answer that in the affirmative. So they can't even comprehend the things that they've done themselves in that 2 year period. And I think that's a really good illustration of no matter how many times people tell you what it is that you're going to do or going to be doing, until you actually get out there, you can't really quite grasp it. And sometimes that's amazing. Sometimes it's amazingly bad and amazingly difficult and amazingly challenging. And that's when we need to make sure that we are as good as we possibly can be in terms of wrapping care and support around those individuals so that they are supported to meet the challenges that we're asking them to do on a daily basis. And sadly, you know, for lots of reasons that we've spoken about, we don't always get that right.
I mean, but how speaking of that, because that is an area that I was thinking about when I was going through this paper and say, look, you know, what is being put in place to deal with the stress levels, to deal with the emotional shock and the trauma that some of, you know, these new officers will inevitably come across. Yeah. And it could even be things like them being assaulted. I mean, I don't think anything ever really prepares you for being assaulted when you're in uniform, which of course we know that has increased over the last couple of years.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a huge list. I won't be able to go through all of it and others will come in. But I mean, if I start with the assaults, then we have, you know, Maggie's Law. So if you're assaulted on duty, you'll be contacted by a member of the executive within 24 hours where we'll talk through with you.
Is that happening though?
Yeah, it does happen. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
We maintain a database of that so you can see how frequently it happens and when the contact is made. And so that's really important to me that we never, ever drop that ball. So, you know, of all the things that we may get wrong, we hopefully shouldn't ever get that one wrong. And even if officers say they don't want to be phone called, then we'll very often still send them an email anyway, just encouraging them to make contact. So that's making sure that everything that should be in place is in place. And then part of the workforce development team we've spoken of as well has been really developing our workforce and care and the You Matter brand that we've been developing, which links in with the Oscar Kilo brand nationally and NPCC, We've refreshed our EAP provider now. We've got TRIM counselling for people that have suffered traumatic episodes. We're also looking at trauma impact processing techniques as well. That there is a whole raft and suite of things that are in place to cater for and support officers, irrespective of whatever the challenges they face, even if it's financial challenges, because we know policing isn't particular, and we've not touched on this as a factor, but as the economy starts to re-emerge from COVID, that then some of the policing hasn't, I think it's an 18% real term reductions in salary over the last 10 years since austerity started. And you're looking at inflation. So policing as a public service received 0 pay rise last year, whereas other public services did. And we need to try and be a public service employer of choice. One element of that is around pay policy. And we need to try and get that right, because as the economy re-emerges from COVID, then people are looking at what they can get for not working shifts, not having a high workload, not dealing with stressful situations, putting yourself in a position where it might risk your mental health. And that's another factor within that. But Phil, I know you could probably talk for hours on terms of what our welfare provision is, but we can probably plug you in outside of here, Commissioner, to run through all of it in detail, because it would take a whole meeting to go through.
Just a couple of things I would just mention on that on this bit of the agenda before we move on. Now, I am quite worried about the ratio of tutors to student officers, and even more so the number of SDO, student development officers. Yeah. You mentioned about this number being increased, Phil. Do you know what we're looking to increase it to?
So at this stage, we've got an idea, Festus. So, but we're doing a piece of work around, and we've engaged with all our superintendents around focusing on that student journey and understanding what that needs to look like and how different that needs to be. So whilst we have an idea, we're just running that piece of work through. There's a paper coming back to our executive board in March, which we'll let you have sight of, which shows what that's going to look like and where that investment may go. Good.
That's brilliant. And the penultimate question I want to ask also, this to you, Gary. You mentioned about some of the training that the Force Exec are delivering to middle and frontline managers. Could you just talk me through what this training looks like and what you're hoping to achieve from it? Because certainly, I mean, the new recruits, they need adequate level of supervision, and because they have to lean on the experience of the sergeants, the inspectors. So how is this kind of playing out in the force at the moment?
So I'll try and answer it in a relatively short way. But I mean, we did some work around the culture 2 years ago, the culture of the organisation, and understanding where we thought we were as an organisation and where people wanted to be. From that, we derived our BU approach, which is focused around professionalism, compassion, courageousness, inclusivity, and being you within the organisation, and being you because you matter. And that's the culture that people identified that we wanted to be part of. So from that, we've had a number of days with all of our senior leaders and spent an awful lot of time looking at culture. Following on from that, we've got the final day with all of our inspectors and sergeants, and I've missed a stage in that as well, because I've met on a 1-to-1 with all of our inspectors and a 3-to-1 with all of our sergeants about 18 months ago to start that piece off around what my expectations were of the leaders in my organisation. And then following through, we've got the final day with all the inspectors and sergeants, and possibly one mop-up after that as well, which we'll put through probably somewhere around about 250 people in total once we've done that. And then as we move into the summer, we've got a Better for Bedfordshire events, which will see everybody in the organisation to have a similar input around the culture of the organisation. And then we've commissioned an external body called Above Difference to work specifically with us around enhancing our cultural intelligence and our cultural quotient, so people have got the right tools to deliver in complex cultural environments, both internally and externally. But it's all very much focused on the culture of the organisation and creating the right culture, which enables us then to go on and deliver the right performance.
So I mean, so in terms of the issues that you've got in the public at the moment around public confidence and trust in policing, I mean, I'm sure this is of concern to everyone in this, meeting, as it is to me. And we all have, I'm sure, a goal, a desire, an interest in making sure that the confidence that residents of Bedfordshire have in Bedfordshire Police as a brand, as a force, and as a service is the very best it can possibly be. I mean, does this try to tackle that, this training program?
Well, I mean, I hesitate to call it a training program. It's not so much training, but it's about it's in it. It's a conversation with us and our officers and staff around why things are important. And absolutely, we talk about public confidence being the foundation of all policing in the UK, because we police by consent, and we police by consent because we have legitimacy in the eyes of our community. We only have legitimacy if we consistently have high standards and live to the values that we espouse. And live in accordance with the code of ethics. And it's a reinforcement of exactly those sorts of things in the conversations we're having, the importance of diversity, and in terms of not just visible diversity, but diversity of thinking, and how we can be a richer organisation, a better, more high performing organisation if actually we're an inclusive organisation. So that's very much the focus of the culture piece that we're talking about with them. And it is, it's a conversation as well, because if we're truly inclusive, then people that disagree with what we're talking about need to have the opportunity to air that and have an open conversation around it without fear of being ostracised or criticised. So we want to create that environment very much where it is sort of like an empowered, inclusive environment where people feel they can be themselves and contribute effectively and be valued for what they bring. Yeah,
I mean, I'm glad we've been able to have this conversation. Because whilst, I mean, we'll be able to touch on this in the next section of the agenda, there's some very positive signs of work being done by the force and by our staff and officers. And I mean, crime overall, things are moving in the right direction. Some of the overrates, for example, around rape, domestic abuse, burglaries, all of those are very, very positive things. And I am really pleased to see the outcome or the fantastic job you and your teams are doing. But I have to say that I remain very concerned about the sticky problem that is retention. And I take some responsibility for that. So I'm not just putting this all on you, Gary. You got broad shoulders. So I'm not putting all on you, but I have a role to play in this. And I'm willing to do whatever I can to support you and your team in improving the retention picture within our force, because we really need that. From a cost point of view, it is vital. From a resilience point of view, it is crucial, and from a public confidence point of view, it is essential as well. So I'm glad that you're taking this seriously, and I just look forward to seeing how the picture looks this time next year. I know you're gonna want to manage my expectations. I know. But you
I was smiling slightly because it's normally me that does the but after you've done the good bit, but you did the but yourself then. So no, I agree with you. It's really, really important for us, but we do need to accept that there is no instant or quick fix to this. It is largely down to resource, but also largely down to the culture as well, and making sure that we give all of our people all the tools that they need to do what we ask them to do.
Yeah, I guess there are things that we have control over, and there are things that we have little control over, and I just want to make sure that as a force, we're all doing everything we can to take care of things that we've got control over.
Yeah, and the line that I use now is, these are much nicer problems than the problems I had as a chief officer 10 years ago. So as we grow the organisation, people think you've got no problems because you've got money, you've got people coming into the organisation. We've got different problems, but they're much nicer problems. But we will deal with them and we'll get it right.
Right, excellent. So move on to number 13 on the agenda, Voice of the Public, where I present your questions to me, to the Chief Constable and his team. And so I'll start with the first one. I have a message of an email from a councillor in Central Bedfordshire asking to raise concerns around 101. What I don't know about the improvement being made. Yeah, he wants to know about the improvements being made to our 101 service, and can you give a brief update on how calls that come through to 101 that are reporting crime are handled and where the crime is recorded? Sean?
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll start and take this one on. So, as you're well cited, we did have some resourcing issues within our control room. And so what we've looked at two elements to that. One is the actual staffing numbers, and the second, the process. So you know that we are recruiting. We've got an open recruitment campaign going on as we speak to get more people into the control room. And we're also supplementing the staff in there with some of our own cops. And we've talked about some of the challenges we faced in terms of experience of cops, but we realise that to enable us to meet the expectations of the public, namely answer the calls when they are in need, we do need to put some cops into the FCC in the interim whilst the new staff get trained. So we've done that. The second is looking at processes. And what we've done is in the room, anyone who's phoned up 101 will know that we recently introduced an interactive voice response system whereby it helps to manage you as the caller and your call and the nature of your call. By putting that in, we've included a priority status in terms of 101 as well. So it's not just 101 999. If you can go through 101 and you will be prioritised. Since October, our wait times for 101 have gone considerably down, which is excellent news for our members of the public. And we are answering 101 calls in less than 5 minutes. Previously, the average time was in excess of 15 minutes.
Yeah.
The beauty being the 101 priority, that it now average is just over 1 minute. But I went into the room this morning, and on a busy Monday morning, bearing in mind that we've had the storms, etc., there was no one waiting in the queues. So the reassurance that I can give you and to the councillor is that we've tackled this challenge on two fronts. One, by increasing the resourcing in there, and secondly, by improving our processes to make sure that we're fit going forward for the demand that we face.
Okay, thanks for that, Sean. Trevor?
The only thing I wanted to add, Commissioner, just to emphasise the point that Sean made at the start, we are recruiting police staff professionals to go into that environment, and we spoke about, police officers changing people's lives every day. The staff in that control room are doing an amazing job at providing an important service. So just take this opportunity as this is going out to the public to, draw people's attention to that as a potential pathway to becoming part of the police service.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Trevor. Another question that I've got here is, can you give us an update on when the new custody building is opening? And can you tell us how it is going to be staffed and which non-custody staff are going into the building, who will open it, and what the snagging arrangements are with the builder? Phil?
So I'll go first and others can chip in. So the build itself is on schedule. It is planned to be completed on the 4th of March. At that point, the builders hand it over to us. We then have a whereby we will walk through it with staff, with people that we're working in there, with our estates colleagues to do all of the snagging work, so that on the 4th of April, it goes live for people moving in there, which includes custody, obviously, but it also includes a lot of our investigation officers and staff. I won't go into the individual units, but a lot of our investigation officers and staff, they will transition into the new build on a timetable process, which will take a couple of months because we'll do team by team. But in essence, what you're going to have is a custody floor and an investigation floor within that build.
All right. You did a good job in sidestepping the question about who is going to open the building.
So at the moment, we are asking the Home Secretary to open the building, and we're waiting for her response.
Again, and I have chased that up, by the way. So I think I'm due to chase up again by the end of this week.
So somebody important will open it, Festus.
Absolutely, and it might be the Chief Constable.
Right, definitely won't be me. I'll say it'll be somebody important. Have you got some scissors ready?
Yeah, I've got a really, really big one.
We'll even find some. We'll even find somebody with a baby.
Oh, right, for the picture, of course. That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Okay. All right. There's another question here about custody staffing levels are low, and there are continued delays in vetting. How is this being addressed, and when will the levels be brought up to a more suitable standard? Sean?
Okay, I'll take this one as it's more operationally based. Festus, thank you. So what we do get, if you can hear the alarm in the background, that's just the Monday afternoon test. Doesn't give me an excuse to run out and not answer this question. So every day I get notification of what the staffing levels look like in custody for 3 days in advance, so that we can plan in terms of any shortfalls. Now, one element that I will reassure you on is that we have not and we will not ever close custody because of custody staffing shortages. And I say that with great confidence because we've built in some resilience, because we know our custody levels and our staffing resourcing isn't up to levels at present, and I'll come to that at the moment. So what we've done to build that resilience is that we've trained some officers to be interim custody detention officers if needed. And that's on a 24/7 basis. So if at any time we have last minute sickness or matters that mean that we are running short, then we've got staff to backfill. So custody will not close, and it hasn't closed. In terms of the current levels, and the vetting issues, there are vetting issues, but there are 3 members of staff who have appealed the initial vetting decision, so that's subject to review. We've got 5 new recruits who are going through the vetting stage. And in terms of training and starters, we've got 1 training course starting in March and then the next one in June. So although we're not there now, we've got those plans in place and the people in place to get up to number, but most importantly, we've got resilience plans to back up any shortages.
Right. Okay, brilliant. And the last question I've got here is around offender management, which I think kind of links in nicely with one of the parts that we discussed in the closed section. The question is, how is Bedfordshire Police managing persistent and dangerous offenders in the community, and is it working?
Okay. So we've got, and I'll try and keep this as succinct as possible. We have an offender management unit within the force. It's got different arms to it. So, for example, we have integrated offender management, people who are on maybe orders or those who volunteer to go on these schemes. And then we've also got sex offender management, which is a legislative tool that we take full advantage of. We've got a very successful unit. It's resourced very well, a good structure in place. And the focus is really twofold. One is reducing reoffending, and that fits in nicely with part of your policing crime plan in terms of breaking the cycle of reoffending. And secondly, it's to deal with those who do reoffend robustly. And if I just give you 2 examples where that's come into play and where we are a leading force in how we approach this. So Bedfordshire is among 12 forces out of the 43 who is piloting a GPS tagging system for serious acquisitive crime. Now, what this does is certain offenders, when released into communities, will wear this tag, but whereas historically it's worked the other way around in terms of checking where the person is, what we are able to do is look at all our crimes and then overlay those people, not just within the local area, but wider, because criminals do travel, and check who is in that area. And if there was anyone in that area, then we can use that as part of the evidence base to investigate further, and if needs be, investigate that individual. Now, this came into real use for us here in Bedfordshire just late last year, whereby one individual was released into the community with such tag. Every day we submitted our crimes in terms of what was occurring, and then we got notification that only 4 days after him being released from prison, sorry, 6 days after being released from prison, he committed a burglary and a burglary of a church premises. That enabled us to build up an evidential case. He was arrested and charged and went back to court and sentenced to a further 20 weeks imprisonment and had his licence recalled. So that's an example of where we've dealt with people robustly. But on the other side, which is equally as important, if not more so, is reducing reoffending and helping and supporting people to get back their lives and live thriving lives. And there is an example of an individual who was on our prolific intensive scheme. It's known as the PI scheme, whereby people are given really strict orders that they have to adhere to, lots of conditions. But the beauty here, and this is direct feedback from this individual, was that the emphasis was on support from both police and probation. And this individual rightly will willingly admit that he often saw the police as the enemy. We worked with that individual together with our probation and criminal justice partners, and he turned his life around. He went for a whole period of time, 3 years without offending, hasn't offended since. More importantly, he is now on the verge of running a really successful business. He's become self-employed as a result of the training that he took up whilst he was on this scheme, and now he's really thriving and a family man. True evidence that if you support people to reduce reoffending, they can go on to have really, really fruitful, thriving lives. They're just two of the examples, Festus. The team do a brilliant, brilliant job. And I could talk for another 20 minutes about all the brilliant stuff they do.
That is, I mean, what a positive and optimistic way to end the meeting. And I think, given the fact that quite a number of the regular customers, so to say, that Bedfordshire Police face are repeat offenders. It just got to show that if we can just make a small dent in the this offender into the area that the offender management team really working, it would help to actually reduce the number of crimes in our county and help to keep more people safe. So I mean, this is such a I hope I can find a way to meet this person at some point, if the rules will allow me to do so, just to congratulate him on such a remarkable turnaround of his life. And we hope I hope to hear more stories like that in the future as well, by the way. So that's the end of the questions from the public. I don't have any other issues that I want to bring to your attention at this point. Sorry, there was just one that just kept through. What do the force do with the information that comes through social media?
I suppose as my microphone's still on, I'll take this one. So last month, the force, again, we do some really innovative work. We opened up a digital desk as part of our FCC. And again, despite the challenges that we face in there, we look at what is really important to our communities and how people can contact us. So although the aspiration is to have this running 24/7, at the moment, because of those resourcing challenges, it's operational from 9 AM to 5 PM Monday to Friday. And that where we have a dedicated comms officer and a dedicated FCC officer who will monitor social media throughout that time. So what happens then is that if there's any crimes reported through that, the FCC operative can pick that up and deal with it. If it's more general inquiries in relation to social media and the force and comms and engagement, our comms officer can pick that up. Now, your follow-up question will likely be what happens out of those hours. So although we have other mechanisms in place, such as web chat and online reporting, social media is picked up retrospectively, and we've got a really whizzy IT product called Orla, whereby out of hours, when our staff from our comms team come back in, they can retrospectively look at social media and then signpost accordingly. What I will say, though, is because we've done loads of work in this space over the last year to 18 months, to signpost people accordingly, the number of crime reports that come through social media are very, very low. And that's a good news story because of all the work we've done previously. So people know exactly where to go in order for us to meet their demand.
Right. Okay. That's because I was getting a bit worried that there would be a deluge of crimes being reported on social media, which could be easily missed compared to those that come through 999 or 101. So, okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for those responses, everyone. And the next agenda item for next meeting, I'm not sure what that. Well, I think Anna will probably have that one, but we're going to have the next delivery board meeting in March. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, and thanks for all your work. And on behalf of the residents in Bedfordshire, I also want to thank all of our staff and officers who are really doing a fantastic job in some very, very extraordinary circumstances as well. Thank you for all your leadership as well. And we'll see you next month.
Thanks, Commissioner. Cheerio.
Bye.
Thank you.